Most people think burnout happens because they're doing too much. But what if it's actually because you're thinking the same way over and over? Welcome back to Shit Creek Survivors, where we discuss real stories of getting stuck up Shit Creek, the paddles we use to get out, and hope for anyone stuck up their own Shit Creek right now. Today, we have an incredible guest, Dr. Andre P. Walton. He's a TEDx speaker, an international best-selling author, and an expert in burnout prevention and well-being. In this episode, we'll dive into his personal experience with burnout, what it looked like in his own life, how he recognized it, and what he did to recover. He's also going to share why so many people silently struggle with burnout and what you can do to catch it early and protect your energy, focus, and creativity. If you've been feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or mentally drained, this one's for you. Let's get into it. Andre, thank you so much for joining us here on Shit Creek Survivors. If you would introduce yourself to us and let us know a little bit about you.
Well, it's really, really great to be here, and I appreciate it. Yes, I'm Andre Walton, and as the more astute of your listeners will have figured out already, I'm not from around these parts. I was born and bred in England, and England in the 50s was mired in a class system that was brutally divided. And
Yeah.
my mum and I were the only people in the family. She was an only mother, and she was a cook housekeeper. She was a very, very creative person, but didn't have too much in the way of sort of readily sellable skills. And if you're a cook housekeeper in 1950s rural England, you're working for people with money. And basically then I was socialized around people who spoke what they used to call the Queen's English. In other words,
Yeah.
I spoke posh. And yet we had zero in the way of funds. I mean, we were, my mother had no money at all. So I went to, the local school where everybody spoke like farming kids, because that's who they were. And that was really the very beginning of my realization that I was destined to be somewhat of a misfit. And a misfit in terms of the lower class Great Britain, and a misfit in terms of the upper class Great Britain, because I didn't fit into either of them. So that had, when I look back on it, of course you don't realize these things at the time, but that had a significant impact on my personality, my life. And some of that was negative, and a good deal of it was positive. I was, became pretty astute at a young age of figuring out what people were thinking, what people were doing, because that's what I had to do to survive. And my mother was highly creative people tend to have very loose connections with social norms. They're kind of a little bit of an option. And she was actually institutionalized when I was 7.
Okay.
And we were really paying the price of not fitting in. She just didn't have what it took to be part of the community, once again, either the upper class community or the village community. And, of course, that's being part of a group, part of a community, is such a fundamental need that humans have. I mean, you deprive somebody of that, then you can really do quite a lot of psychological damage. And that was a very, very strange time for me. I did have a dad. I didn't know he was my father until I was 10. No idea to this day why they didn't actually leak that information to me, but he was just Uncle Arthur, who used to visit occasionally. And so during that time, I was looked after by a Roman Catholic priest and his housekeeper. and
Hmm.
a group of Roman Catholic nuns, and all just wonderful people. I mean, their hearts were definitely in the right place. You know, sometimes if I say
Good.
Roman Catholic priest, you know, I can hear people wincing and frowning, but
Yeah.
no, nothing of that nature. But of course, they had
Okay, good.
absolutely no idea how to deal with kids. I mean, suddenly
Right.
having a kid in the rectory was just a totally strange experience for both of us. So, anyway, that was kind of a very strange and challenging time for me, and it didn't last that long. I was sent to a Roman Catholic boarding school, um, and that was run by a group of brothers. The brothers, as in the religious brothers, you know,
Right.
quasi monks, called the Presentation Brothers. And suffice to say that the Pope made sure that they were no longer in the educational arena in 2010, 2012, something like that,
Okay.
because there had been so many accusations of sexual abuse against the Presentation Brothers schools
Hmm.
and so forth. Now, I didn't suffer that, but they were also sadists, and you know, the people who they employed from outside of the Brotherhood, they managed to find sadists to fill those roles as well. So I was
Oh,
beaten a
wow.
lot during that time, and a lot of that has been blanked out of my memory. To be honest, it's just
Yeah.
so creativity has always sort of been with me. My father was actually a world-renowned artist, and just a absolutely stunning painter, but also a commercial artist. So I've always been around creative people. So I've seen the
Hmm.
negative side of creativity, but
Right.
also very much enjoyed the positive side. In my high school days, I was all science, technology, electronics, blah blah blah, and I graduated from high school with all that stuff, physics, so on and so
Oh,
forth.
wow.
And my first job out of school was as a graphic designer for a magazine publishing house,
Oh, cool.
and that was I'm sure that rumbling sound is probably my career counselor from high school in his grave. You know, I was I was not his poster child. I mean, um,
Yeah.
and then in my 20s, I actually sort of went back to the science side, and I got a master's degree in medical physics, and I started to research. I got a job as a physics researcher in medical ultrasound, and that
Wow.
was the beginning of starting to invent things. And I invented a medical ultrasound measuring system that became a global leader in its field. I mean, pretty much all the
Wow.
institutes of standards around the world, from you know, the National Physical Laboratory here to, you know, the PTB in Germany, Japan, so forth, used to use my system as their measurement system for ultrasound. And
Wow.
in parallel with that, I had a friend who was a very, very good, I mean, world-class Latin percussion um, drummer. And so
Hmm.
he would have bongos and congas and all this sort of thing, and it was a nightmare for him to mic this stuff. Right, he's got, you know, his feet are near the bottom of the congas, so if he had regular microphones, he'd always be kicking them, and then he's got the bongos up
Right.
here, which makes it difficult to mic because he's also tinkering away with things that he's, you know, little bells and little things that he's hitting. So I invented him a microphone that he could actually stick inside the congas and inside the bongos. So there was
Oh,
no
cool.
kind of regular microphones. And the long and the short of it is, over the next 15 years, I turned that invention to become one of the top piano mics in the world. Um,
Wow.
Frank Sinatra wouldn't go on stage without it for the last 2 years of his life. And I only found that out because I got an emergency call sort of late afternoon from his sound guy in Chicago saying, you know, the outside broadcast truck has just run over the bag that had your mics in it. And we know if we're going to get Frank on stage this evening, we've got to get another one. So I had
Right.
to call my sales rep from the Chicago area, and I bribed him by saying, I think if you took your wife with you, you'd probably get tickets to the show tonight, So that was the deal. But yeah, so that became a really, really big deal with people like that, and Frank Sinatra and Radio City Music Hall. And I mean, it was worldwide. It was a very, very big deal. So, invention was my expression of creativity. And
Wow.
so that was kind of so that I ended up really with 3 strands to my DNA. One was creativity. The other was business. In the course of my building up my businesses, that became a real fascination for me. And the third was coaching and teaching. And
Okay.
when I sold my businesses, well, before I sold it, about probably a year before I sold the companies, several things came together that were very negative. I
Oh.
was sitting in a booth in Chicago's McCormick Place, just waiting for the NAMM show to start, and I had 2 phone calls. One was from a weeping mother in a hospital in England, telling me that my stepfather had died.
Oh.
And so, and then about an hour later, I got a call from my secretary in Florida saying that my manager in Florida hadn't showed up for the last 3 days. And
Oh.
he was supposed to be flying up later that day to help man the booth and to take over the booth, because I was at the beginning of a 5 train show trip around the world: England, Frankfurt, Japan, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and then back to the office. So this
Wow.
was a major deal. And I'd forgotten that he was an alcoholic, but he'd gone shopping, and mysteriously bottles of wine had fallen into his shopping cart. And
Yep.
that was it. It was back to rehab for him. So that sent me, I mean, really the outside world never really noticed the difference. I mean, I managed to get people from the company in England to sort out manning the booth at these various trade shows we were going to be at. But I within days, I was plunged into really severe burnout. And it was a major deal. I mean, within 2 weeks, I was just barely capable of getting any sleep at all. I would just sort of lie on the couch watching TV. I never even went to bed, and it was absolutely devastating. Gradually, all my friends left. Well, I pushed them all away, basically. My first wife
Okay.
was English, and I basically managed to send her back to England. Go visit your mother for a while. All my friends,
Yeah.
they'd call. I say, no, I know we normally meet now, but I can't see you for a couple of weeks. I'm just too busy. One friend didn't resist. I mean, I said to him, look, Gio, I just can't do it. I'm just too busy. I've got too many things going. And he knew something was up. And,
Yeah.
9 o'clock following morning, knock on the door. You've got a big brown bag with some healthy food to eat. And so, okay, Andre, I thought we'd have breakfast. And he wasn't going to take no for an answer. I mean,
Right.
and it was kind of interesting. After a little while, after a couple of weeks of coming to see me almost on a daily basis, he gave me a piece of paper and he said, I want you to call this person. Dana Birdsell was her name, and she's a meditation teacher.
Okay.
And I did, and learning to meditate was a 3-day process. After day 1, I swear it was the first time I had slept well now for months. And
Yeah.
after day 3 was over, that was really the beginning of my recovery. And it was
Okay.
that was I will be forever thankful to Jim. After I sold the businesses, I started to do some consulting work. Basically, small European companies that I'd met along my journey, and
Right.
they'd seen me go from Europe to America and to build a successful business here, and so that was a very interesting time. But I kind of realized that in the course of business consulting, we're always looking at kind of the nuts and bolts of it all. We're looking at the finances. We're looking at are you ready financially to open a subsidiary? Are you looking I thought, no, this is missing the whole boat. I mean, let's focus on what really matters in your business, which is the people. That's your real
Yeah.
asset. It doesn't show up
Yeah.
on any P&L. It doesn't show up on any cash flow, but that's the real asset. So I went back to school and earned a PhD in social psychology, and that was
Wow.
just an amazing experience. I just really, being able to focus on what it is that makes people tick, how they react, how the individual works within the group,
Right.
which is really what social psychology is all about.
Yeah,
And
that is interesting.
yeah, it's just a wonderful subject, and to be able to focus on it for 5 years and really get to dig into it. Creativity did not that had already got its teeth into me big time, so that was the
Right.
focus of my PhD. Was creativity in an organizational context,
Oh,
and
cool.
so this was about this obviously incorporated innovation and things of that nature.
Hmm.
And to wind the clock back to more closer to today's world, what I now focus on is the use of creative thinking in helping my coaching clients, and
Right.
specifically people with burnout, stress, anxiety.
Mm.
I have never had any clients with PTSD because they generally go to more traditional, medically oriented routes to get to their
Right.
solution. But there are definitely some very real similarities between burnout and PTSD. But what was
Hmm.
very interesting to me was that in the sort of 8 years, no, more than that, over 10 years between when I published my first book and when I published my second book, which came out last year, um, and that became an international bestseller within the first few weeks. Between those
Wow.
times, um, we had discovered something called fMRI, and we all know what an MRI is. We break our leg,
Yeah.
we have, smack our head too hard, we go into this tunnel and we get frozen in space and time and look at what's going on in the brain. Well, fMRI is interesting. It's functional MRI, and it's not frozen in time. It's frozen in space. You have to have a
Hmm.
specific thing that you're looking at, but it's not frozen in time. So you can actually get somebody to think of something, let's say something creative, and you might give them a little script to think before they go in there. And
Right.
then you'll see specific neural pathways light up within the brain.
Okay.
And similarly, you can then cue them and you say, okay, now I want you to think of something analytical. Let's just try and work out what your taxes are going to be in a couple of months. So
Right.
something really riveting like that, and you'll see a whole different set of little green blobs lighting up, and that's a different neural pathway. So
Wow.
this idea that we can think in two discrete kinds of ways. Well, I hadn't really isolated it as two at that point, but that you've got creativity as a distinct. Now that this pathway may look different on different people, but it will still be very different to when you get that person to think about something differently.
Right.
And a number of things came to make sense for me. And the first was that people who are thinking, who have burnout or anxiety, just as an observation when coaching, they tend to be very focused in what they're thinking about. That they're not seeing
Hmm.
any. There's nothing big picture about their view of the world at that point. I kind of compare it to a racehorse with blinders on. They're focused and on the source of their anxiety, the focus of what it is that got them to their burnout or anxiety,
Hmm.
and everything to do with that. There's no kind of broad vision. I kind of call it the hamster wheel effect. When you're having a coaching session with somebody with burnout, then really it's difficult to move them away from the discussion about that burnout and what caused it. And
Yeah.
so, and in ultimately, if you don't treat somebody in that kind of condition, that can end up in suicide, because
Oh,
that
goodness.
whole way of thinking really prevents you from looking at the future. If you're going to look at the future, you can't do it through a microscope. You
Right.
need a wide angle lens, and that's where creative thinking comes in. Creative thinking is that wide angle lens.
Okay.
So, just to kind of put all this together, on the one hand, you've got this analytical style of thinking, analytical deductive style of thinking, which
Yeah.
I call convergent thinking. That's microscope thinking. And then you've got creative thinking, which is your divergent wide angle lens thinking. And
Hmm.
so really what I've been working on, and what my current programs are related to burnout, is the idea that you change somebody's neural pathways. You don't try and make
Hmm.
subtle shifts to the old way of thinking. You create a whole new way of thinking for them. And
Right.
there's a kind of a parallel in my mind. If you're dealing with somebody, if you're coaching somebody that has an addiction, alcohol, drugs, gambling, the first thing that you really want to do, if you can, is get them out of their original environment into a new
Hmm.
environment. You want to change as
Yeah.
much as possible so they don't have these triggers that are going to pull them
Yeah.
back to, that bottle sitting in the corner looks very tempting, or, surely if I get
Right.
on the internet, I could just put a bet. I know these guys are going to win. Whatever it is, you're getting out of that environment. And in a
So like
sense,
people, places, and things kind of like make
absolutely.
that. I've been coached on this. It worked for me. I had to, separate myself from a lot of things, people, places, and things that would remind me of taking those actions that I was previously taking. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Anyways, keep going. Sorry.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think the thing is, so sometimes that stuff has to be quite fundamental. I mean,
Hmm.
you're going to say, okay, I'm giving up alcohol, so I'm not even going to go into a bar, at
Right.
least for the
Yeah.
first couple of years, until I can, I really feel secure in not drinking and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So this idea that a quantum leap, as opposed to subtle shifts, I think has a lot of validity in general, and certainly with things like burnout, where you're working with someone that has, firstly, they've probably very sleep deprived. They
Hmm.
may well have succeeded in pushing away everybody who was important to them and could have helped, but you push
Yeah.
them away because somewhere in your brain it is like, I've got a real problem, I need all the energy in my mind to solve my problem, and I can't waste it talking to anybody else. There's something that
Yeah.
goes on in the mind that just says, I can only focus on solving this one problem, not realizing that you're not solving it at all. you know
Right.
this is that terrible mix that sometimes happens in the mind between all these sort of primordial instinctive ways of thinking, the fight or flight kind of instinct, and the
Yeah.
modern world where some of those are just not appropriate. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing. So on the one hand, you've got this very focused, potentially very dangerous way of focusing on your situation, your negative situation, and on the other, you've got the unknown called creative thinking. And if you can get people to create new neural pathways along the creative thinking lines, then they can use that as a trigger. When they start to feel themselves go down this old pathway towards the swamp, they can instantly say, no, that's the wrong direction. I'm going to go over here. And,
Right.
what people takes a little while sometimes for people to realize this when I'm coaching them, but we're not talking about creative thinking here, as in, I've never even opened a paint box, so there's nothing I could do about painting. This is a way of thinking, and this is a way of thinking
Okay.
that is, for instance, um, is why people often have aha moments when they go for a walk. If you've got a
Mm,
problem or whatever, and you go for a walk, well, first of all, what are you doing? You're getting out of your house. So
hmm
you're getting in an environment where you can see 360 degrees of space.
Yeah.
So you're instantly physically encouraging yourself to take off those blinders.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all that triggers the mind to feel similarly. If you've ever had anybody say, look, if you're feeling sad or depressed, go for a walk, but make sure you're looking up. I don't know
Mm,
if you've ever had anybody say that to you, but it's a common phenomenon. It's used in counseling, coaching, and it works.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
nobody's really said why it works, but I believe why it works is because you are, once again, if you're walking staring down at 2 feet in front of your feet, you've got a very small area of vision. You start to look
Yeah.
up and you've got a huge space to look at. So
Yeah.
that triggers the mind into this divergent thinking process. So there's
Wow.
all sorts of ways that you can use things you do in your common, day-to-day life. I mean, the idea is that you start to actively think about the decisions you make rather than
Okay.
slipping into the sort of, okay, these are the clothes I always wear, and this is the route I always take to work. And when I get there, I have a cup of coffee, I say hello to this person, and I sit down at my desk.
Right.
We shake all that up a bit. No, take a different route to work. When you go out to your favorite restaurant tonight, choose something different from the menu, or even choose a different menu.
Right.
Change all these little things, and the brain starts to get used to the idea that it doesn't have to use the same neural pathways.
Wow. So
We're
you're making like conscious decisions and being in the moment compared to your subconscious just taking over and you just going along for the ride. That's so funny. I that happens to me sometimes when I'm driving. Like I will not remember the last 10 minutes. Like how did I get here? And it's because I'm so just running on like the system,
yes.
and not really participating in the moment. That makes total sense. Thank you. That's very cool.
And of course, in your in your previous profession, as a law enforcement officer, I mean, that's precisely the way you're trained to think, is to
Mhm.
do things by rote. I used to be a scuba dive instructor, and
Okay.
what a lot of the time what you're focusing on is, if this happens, we want to make it intuitive to do this.
Mhm.
So as a
Yeah.
safety thing, so if you are if you're running short of air, which you should never do, but occasionally it could happen, then this is what you do. You always have a buddy. You always do this. You always plan your dive. You're trying to make this whole thing go according to a pretty rigid set of protocols for safety
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah,
So
to
that
bring the
kind of,
risks down. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so,
Mhm.
those support mechanisms also make it very comfortable for you. You
Yeah.
start to, I know after I'd been scuba diving, regularly for, 6 months, a year, I felt totally comfortable in the water. Even, this was in Florida. Sometimes you get 6, 8 foot waves come, the wind would change and the Gulf Stream
Yeah.
came in and suddenly, there you are bouncing around. I felt totally comfortable in inflated BC. I wouldn't get
Mhm.
water in my mouth. I can still put, the regulatory in my mouth, even though I'm on top of the water. So, these kind of protocols can provide a lot of comfort, and we all need that structure to some
Mhm.
extent. But the trick
Yeah.
is, we want to avoid using that structure under certain circumstances. We don't want all the decisions in our life to be that structure, because you're
Okay.
eliminating that creativity. And so the crucial thing in my mind is that we have a balance between creative thinking and deductive analytical thinking. And
Okay.
most of the time in today's world, which is so technologically biased, um, we have largely lost creative thinking. And
Mm,
you can sort of see this in history. If you look back through times of incredible innovation, I mean, whether it's the first century China, where where you're talking about gunpowder, talking about um, a clock, even you're talking
hmm
about the compass. You also had incredible innovations in literature, in art, and in
hmm
drama, and that's true in the Italian Renaissance, even the Industrial Revolution that we call industrial, but that actually signified an awful lot of incredible discovery and stuff from, Darwin sailing the oceans to, you know, um,
Yeah.
literature and once again music. That was really the breaking point between, um, you know, Baroque type of music to more modern sort of, there were really innovations all over the place. Now, that's
Right.
not so much the case. I mean, we've, from the days of the computer, the internet, and now AI, it really has dominated a lot of our thinking processes. We haven't seen, other than the kind of anomalous blip in the 60s and 70s when, music was turned upside down by pop music and,
Right.
people dropping acid to making these interesting kind of art forms that nobody had seen before, and the Andy
hmm
Warhols of the world and all that kind of thing. I mean, that was a brief period of quite dramatic um,
Right.
evolution of artistic forms, but that's quite a long time ago now, and we haven't really seen that much of this. So we're very biased towards this analytical thinking, and
Yeah.
the trouble with that is that without that shift to creativity, it's very easy to disappear down the rabbit hole of burnout. And I think it's one of the reasons that burnout is just exploding. I call it the silent epidemic. I mean, you're talking now about, 2/3 of professionals um, saying that they've actually had burnout, and
Wow.
50% of them that will recur within the next 18 months. So you're talking, it's estimated it's costing the country about $1 trillion a year. Um,
Whoa. I didn't.
oh
That's
yeah,
an interesting way to put it.
and the known amount just in medical costs is about $250 billion, about $250 billion. Um, It's
Wow.
a very, very costly process. And of course, you look at every dollar that's spent on that and you think, okay, what's the social impact here?
Yeah.
And, it's not surprising that by almost all measures, um, adults in America are becoming less connected to each other.
Mm. Yeah, I can
And
see that.
people are blaming social media and that kind of thing. But I think it also would correlate with this idea that we are drifting away from creativity more and more and more, because creativity is that wide angle lens that encourages everything in our environment to be a part of us. And
That's
so
yeah.
if you're going to reduce that, then you're going to be inherently one of those people. Burnout is the extreme, but where you're pushing people away, or you're just simply no longer prioritizing the idea of making new social connections, or
Right.
establishing the old ones, and so on and so forth. So, now that bit is conjecture, but it sort of fits the pattern.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense that sometimes we might plateau because we think it's almost like a pride thing. Oh, we've really got this down. Oh, we really know what we're doing. It's like I heard the story about the Renaissance period where, they were losing mothers like nobody's business after birth, right? It was just like they couldn't figure it out. These ladies kept passing away, who were giving birth, and then they would do autopsies, I think, in the morning on the women, and then in the afternoon they would do the births, and they wouldn't clean their instruments in between.
Yeah.
And and someone actually said, "Hey, shouldn't we be cleaning our stuff?" And then he was basically laughed out of the profession. Like, "What are you talking
Yes.
about?" And then 20 years later, they were finally like, "Oh, maybe it's because we're not washing our tools." So it's like a 20-year gap of like mentally we limited what we conceive to be true because we thought we knew more, we
Yeah.
thought we were kind of like on the top of the hill. And then like I don't know why we do that as people. We think we really got our stuff together and we sort of close the doors to whatever else is coming from it. And it works that way with individuals too. You know what I mean? Like if you really think you got your stuff together, you almost narrow your focus and you're like, if I keep everything exactly where it is, everything will keep going exactly where I want it to go. But yeah, it can get to be too much burnout. And you're like, eventually you hit the question, why am I doing this? And that's a scary place to be because
Yes.
you're questioning this thing that, did potentially give you joy for a long time. And now you're like, I can barely handle looking at it because it just feels like it's bleeding me dry, which is a weird thing. Is it because we get caught up doing the same thing over and over and over and over? And then maybe we project into the future, like, oh my gosh, am I really going to be doing this for the next 20 years? And do you think that's maybe part of being the overwhelmed? Or what do you think the kind of
Um,
gets you right?
I think it's the other way around. I think
Okay.
um, the if you lose that ability to look through the wide angle lens and you're
Mm-hmm.
always looking through the microscope, that becomes the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that becomes, so basically, and you see this in business. I mean, if some of my business clients came to me, when they've just were beginning to get overwhelmed, and when you kind of really dig into it, one of the things that I'm big on is strategic planning because it reduces people's stress. If you've got a good
Right.
strategic plan for your business, there are certain things you don't have to worry about once you really get into the flow because you've got
Mm-hmm.
structure, which is keeping you, giving you a framework. And so,
Yeah.
but it's quite often, if people are really working longer hours and harder than is good for them, then their idea of a strategic plan is what's happening next month. And being
Mm.
able to actually think realistically about what they want their business to look like in 5 years or 3 years or even a year away. It's like, oh, well, we're the
Mm-hmm.
same, but I want the same thing, but just making a bit more, just selling a bit more stuff. Really?
Yeah.
That's all you can come up with, and it's because you've got these blinders coming on. I mean, it's just, you've got this perpetual focus. Now, if you're with creative people a lot, you don't notice that happening. That is,
Mm.
that there are always different things to do with whatever you're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of tendency to focus in on anything um, at the exclusion of any other way of thinking. That just isn't there. Now, I mean, creative people need both forms of thinking, right? Now, when
Right.
my sister is a very, very accomplished artist. She's been painting and teaching all her life. She's reached the ripe old age of 90, and she'll still stack her car up with God knows what all else, and disappear for sometimes 3 or 4 weeks to paint up in the hills of Wales or Scotland or wherever it is.
Oh,
And
wow.
now she needs to, when she leaves home, she's got to have everything she possibly needs to do her art. I mean,
Right.
things like food and the rest of it, she can sort that out. But in terms of like things that she's invented herself to do certain effects and this kind of stuff, and all the canvas sizes she
Right.
can possibly need. Well, that's a lot of organization. A friend of mine is a sculptor, and if he's thinking, he's got this idea in his mind of what he wants to create and how he wants to create it. And there's something a piece that he was talking about recently to me. He said, I really wanted to use Tennessee marble because it's beautiful pink marble. He said, but I couldn't do
Hmm.
it for this piece because I know that Tennessee marble is very stratified. If you hit it in particular ways, it'll just chip in flakes. So it's
Right.
no good for something smooth because
Mm.
you can't sculpt it in that way. So all these things are the deductive, logical part of creating something. So
Right.
these are the that's where your creative person needs to have this logical process. They need to
Yeah.
have all those bits to make it equal. So it's a little bit like I'm a jazz flute player, and
Okay.
it's part of the time you're just really having a good time playing with the other, and you're going to be playing basically the same tune at that point, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if it's autumn leaves, then autumn leaves it is, and that's it. But then it's your turn to step out and and do your improvisation. And
Right.
that's so you're going from the structure to the freewheeling, to this is your brand coming out now. This is and to, to be honest, that's what the music takes you there. You
Yeah.
end up, this is where you get into the flow. And you can hear this in other, when they're just playing the regular music, you think, oh, that's a lovely tone. But it's the same music that everybody else is playing. But it's,
Right.
when they start to then, you know, their brand comes out and they're doing this uniqueness, that's their own personality coming into the music. And then they have to switch back to the other. So these two ways, the kind of structured, rule following way has its place, right?
Yeah.
We want to stay out of prison, and following rules is not a bad start in life. And then on the other
Hmm.
hand, you've got your individuality. And
Yeah.
so, that compromise between the two is, I think, the way to a healthy person.
Good. That makes sense. Yeah, to be able to have both. Because, yeah, if I didn't have some sort of structure to my day, who knows where I'd end up. But, to be creative, you need your environment to be set up so you can go into that flow, like you said. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Now, I think you've done a great job of explaining kind of, the tools that you would suggest for someone to use, the idea of thinking outside the box in your moment, of despair, and knowing that other people have been there and that there's other ways than just what you see. As soon as you open the door to the idea that I know less than I know, it's almost like a relieving thing, because it means there's so much more out there. Because I think a lot of times we think that we've got a concept of everything and that nothing's going to work. But the
Yeah.
truth is, there's so much more out there that could potentially help. And once you open that door, it gets easier to do it more and more because you've seen the benefits from doing it, instead of just sticking to your
Yes.
strict ways, you're
Yes.
like, oh, and then you do it more and more, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to stop figuring this out right away on my own. And I'm going to start kind of thinking outside here, because
Yes.
that's where the magic is. Very cool. Now, if someone were stuck in their own shit creek right now, okay, what words of advice or encouragement or bit of gold would you give them to keep going and keep going in the good fight?
Well, I can really only reflect on burnout
Hmm.
in a practical sense, in any detail. And that is, I think it's important to realize how serious it can be. So,
Hmm.
you know, um, take this seriously. And there is, because of the nature of it, if if you're stuck there looking down the microscope and you want to look out of the window towards the Sierra Nevada hills, which is the view that I love every morning when I open the drapes. Um,
Beautiful.
you need, if it's burnout, you need some help to do that, and that help can come from a professional, or can come from people around you. So
Okay.
I think my real advice would be to to actually focus on your relationships, realize how important they are, and also realize um, how beautiful it is to be with people who love you, and even if you don't feel you necessarily have much love left in you at the moment, to recognize
Right.
that they love you, to enjoy the beauty of their presence, but also enjoy the beauty of everything that's around you. I could
Hmm.
open my blinds in the morning in probably, 1 second per window, but I don't. I take probably more like 5 seconds per window, because every time I look at the Sierra Nevada mountains first thing in the morning, I see something slightly different, and it's always magnificent. And so,
Oh.
you know, focus on those things in your life on a daily basis. It takes seconds, to
Hmm.
to actually do that. And all of those things will help you start to get out of the microscope into the wide angle lens and realize that the goal here is to realize that there is a future,
Mm.
and that future has a lot of positive potential for you,
Hmm.
no matter who you are. Um, and it really doesn't matter. Sometimes people will point the finger back at me. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2021, and it was quite well advanced, and it required a stack of radiation treatment, internal radiation treatment, external radiation treatment with bits of a radioactive material implanted in my body, followed by
Wow.
chemo. And, there were times there where it was very difficult to see a future.
Hmm.
And the real trick for me then was to really bring myself to the beauty that was around me
Mm.
now, absolutely now.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, if I don't make it through all this, let's at least enjoy what exists at the moment. So
Yeah.
it's difficult to preach the future when you're in something that may have no future, but
Right.
you don't know that. You just
Hmm.
don't know that. And so,
Right.
here I am, only a few years later, full of health. Everything
Beautiful.
was just perfect. And so, the anything that I could do to prevent myself being dragged into the swamp then was just a complete
Hmm.
waste of energy, waste of life, everything else. So
Yeah.
these things, though, are habits, and it's powerful to adopt these habits before we actually get to Shit Creek. When we're actually,
Mm.
still, quietly going down the river and not even realizing that the creek's in front of us, we can still build these habits of, really appreciating our friends, appreciating our family, appreciating the nature around us, appreciating whatever it is we like. If we like to read, then
Yeah.
really appreciate it. And, just to really reinforce or indeed create those neural pathways that relate to that way of thinking, because that is this beautiful divergent way of thinking. And
Hmm.
you're not sacrificing anything. What you're doing is you're telling the brain you are not going to allow it to use the lazy, energy conserving, knee jerk reactions that
Mm.
we tend
Yeah.
to use on an everyday basis. Yes, you can do that. I don't care if I actually consciously think about putting my pants on in the morning or making a cup of coffee or whatever. That's fine. You got your place over there, but my place now is to think about every decision that's important consciously and
Yeah.
realize how many decisions you've got. You're almost sort of brainstorming. I mean, it can be exhausting. Thinking that way, by the way, uses as much energy as going for a stroll. So it's
Oh,
not
wow.
surprising that the brain tries to get us away from that to this kind of energy conserving process. But
Yeah.
it's and you can do that. You can It drives my wife nuts. I mean, sometimes I'm sort of trying to make a decision out of something that she thinks is, well, you just do it this way. It's how we've always done it. Okay, fine. But
Right.
the point is that there is some a compromise there where we can really say, is this what I want to do? Because that
Uh-huh.
extends to that same neural pathway extends to the question, is this what I really want to do with my life?
Yeah.
And so that's the pathway to happiness and satisfaction that we all want to follow.
Man, you said that very eloquently. It's a lot harder to do, but hearing the way you explained it made it a lot simpler in my mind. The idea of the microscope versus the wide lens, the idea of stacking gratitude and seeing what's in front of you, it can change your life, when you start realizing that the things around you are miracles, But that Andre, thank you so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Really wonderful to talk to you.
All right, guys, if you got any value out of this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what we've got coming next. We're bringing you real stories, real tools, and real conversations to help you get out of your own shit creek. And if you know someone who's feeling burned out or feeling stuck right now, share this with them. It might be the paddle that they're looking for. We appreciate you guys being here, and we'll see you on the next one.